Fire discs over Katanga, Lubumbashi, Belgian Congo. Year 1952. Ranks mattered little in that corner of the world. We weren't in a declared war, but the Belgian Congo was a boiling pot of interests. Mining, espionage, the Cold War. Everyone had their eyes on this land rich in uranium. For me, it was just the place where fate had thrown me, far from my country and my family. Days passed in unbearable heat, accompanied by the constant buzzing of mosquitoes. The military base in Lubumbashi was nothing more than a handful of concrete barracks, with a dirt runway barely suitable for takeoff. My job was to patrol the skies, monitor any suspicious activity, and, in theory, protect the interests of those funding this occupation. Everything changed that afternoon. I was in the officers' lounge when a soldier rushed in. "Sir, there's something in the sky. Something big." His expression wasn't that of someone who had seen an enemy plane or a weather balloon. No, there was fear on his face. I stepped outside and looked up. They were there. 2 silver discs floated in the sky over the uranium mines. They didn't move like airplanes or anything I'd seen before. They shone with an incandescent light, as if the metal was glowing hot. The radio exploded with confused orders. My superior, a Belgian colonel who rarely left his office, demanded that someone take off immediately. I volunteered. I climbed into my jet fighter, one of the few modern machines we had. The mechanic patted me on the shoulder before closing the cockpit. "Good luck, Captain." I didn't respond. I just nodded and started the engines. The plane roared as it took off, kicking up a cloud of dust behind me. I ascended toward the objects, which remained there, floating with unnatural tranquility. As I got closer, the details became clearer. They were between 12 and 15 meters in diameter. Their surface was smooth, no rivets, no antennas, no windows. In the center, a dome remained motionless, while the edges rotated at an absurd speed, emitting a glow that hurt the eyes. I pressed the communicator. "I have them in sight." "What the hell are they, Captain?" "Good question." I slowed down and tried to get closer. That's when the objects moved. Not like a plane or a helicopter would. They darted back and forth at impossible angles, as if gravity didn't exist for them. I tried to follow them, but with every maneuver they seemed to anticipate my moves. I chased them for what felt like eternal minutes, always on the verge of catching them, but never quite close enough. Sweat dripped down my forehead. The radio crackled with nervous voices. "Captain, can you describe their behavior?" "They're unlike anything I've seen before," I replied, without taking my eyes off them. "They move too fast." Then, suddenly, they accelerated. In the blink of an eye, they shot off at an impossible speed, heading toward Lake Tanganyika. I was left there, floating in the sky, feeling small and absurd. When I landed, they were waiting for me on the runway. Belgian officers, Americans, and a few civilians in suits and dark glasses. They didn't say who they were, but they didn't have to. They took me to a closed room and questioned me for hours. "Describe the shape again. Could it be a Soviet weapon? Was there any attempt at communication?" I answered as precisely as I could, but every response only led to more questions. In the end, they let me go with a warning. "Forget this, Captain. Don't mention it again." But how could I forget something like that? That night, I barely slept. Outside, the jungle whispered ancient secrets, and in my head, the image of those discs kept spinning, glowing in the darkness. Invulnerable Mai-Mai militias, Kivu. Bullets make no sound when they pierce flesh. The first time I discovered this was in Kivu, deep in the heart of eastern Congo, a land of dense jungles and ancient shadows. It wasn't in a normal battle, nor against a conventional enemy. It was against something that shouldn't have existed, something that never forgets. But before I got there, before I understood real fear, I was just another soldier in a war that had turned into a swamp with no escape. I didn't care about ideals or politics, only about my comrades and surviving the next day. I had seen many things before Kivu. I had seen the empty stare of a man who knows he is about to die. I had felt the warmth of someone else's blood on my hands. I had learned that the jungle hides things worse than predators. That year, we were sent to track a Mai cell in a village on the banks of the Loa River. Our battalion had received reports of a group that had taken control of several villages, leaving only corpses and fear in their wake. We knew they used witchcraft, that they believed their bodies were protected by rituals and that bullets turned to water upon touching them. Superstitions, I thought, until I saw them with my own eyes. We approached the village at dusk, moving in a dispersed formation, fingers on the trigger and senses on high alert. The silence was thick, unreal. There were no children, no elderly, only burned huts and mutilated bodies. But the most disturbing thing was what we found in the central square, a circle of Mai soldiers standing completely still. They seemed to be waiting for something. They wore dirty rags, with bone necklaces and fetishes hanging from their necks. Their bodies were covered in a thick, dark substance. Some of my comrades said it was mud, but the smell was different, metallic, like blood. The lieutenant gave the order, and we opened fire. The first shot hit one in the chest. He didn't fall. The second went through his skull. He remained standing. One by one, the Mai began to move, as if awakening from a trance. They didn't run. They walked toward us with an unsettling calm, murmuring something in a language we didn't understand. We kept shooting. We kept watching them fall and rise again. "This isn't normal," one of our men screamed before being silenced with a single slash from a machete. The fight turned into a slaughter. What should have been a quick ambush became a desperate struggle to escape that hell. The jungle swallowed us as we fled, leaving behind the fallen, those who weren't lucky enough to run. I don't know how long we ran, but when we stopped, there were only a few of us left. The jungle surrounded us with its suffocating humidity and dense air. We had lost the radio, the compass, and half our unit. Only 6 remained. "They're not human," one of ours said, his voice trembling. I saw one get his head blown off, and he kept walking. "It's witchcraft," murmured another. I didn't respond. At that moment, I couldn't deny what we had seen. We spent the night hiding in the undergrowth, taking turns keeping watch. But in Kivu's jungle, the sounds never stop. We knew something was stalking us, something moving among the trees without making a sound. By dawn, 2 of ours had disappeared. No screams, no signs of struggle. Only their backpacks remained, and the smell of damp earth lingered in the air. "They're hunting us," the sergeant whispered, his eyes empty. We couldn't stay in the jungle. The only option was to return to the village, recover what we could, and call for reinforcements. We knew it was madness, but staying there was worse. When we arrived, the scene had changed. The bodies of the Mai we had taken down were gone, but in their place, there was something else. A circle of human skulls in the square, an improvised altar made of branches and bones, and in the center, a man. He was tall, his skin covered in scars, his eyes completely black. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. When he saw us, he smiled. "You came to die," he said in broken French. He raised a hand and the jungle responded. From the trees emerged those we thought were dead. Their wounds were still there, open, impossible, but their bodies kept moving. "Fire!" I shouted. The bullets hit them, knocked them down, but didn't stop them. Something roared within the jungle. an inhuman sound, an echo of something ancient. I don't remember how I escaped. I only know that I ran. I ran until my legs gave out and the darkness swallowed me. I woke up in a military camp days later. A reconnaissance team had found only 2 of us, dehydrated and on the brink of death. No one believed us. They said stress had made us hallucinate, that the Mai were just fanatical warriors, not demons. But I know what I saw. I know what hunted us in the jungle. Years later, I still dream of Kivu, and in my nightmares, I still hear that voice in the jungle, repeating the same words. You came to die. Haunted dwarfs of Ituri. Deep in the Ituri forest, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I learned that some things cannot be explained with logic or bullets. We were on a reconnaissance mission, routine in theory. Our unit had orders to advance through a stretch of jungle where suspicious activity had been reported. Drug traffickers, rebel groups, the usual. It was hostile terrain, but no more than what we were used to. There were 6 of us. Good soldiers, battle-hardened, accustomed to moving through the jungle. We cut our way through the thick vegetation with machetes, advancing cautiously. The humidity was unbearable, and the buzz of insects surrounded us like a never-ending echo. We set up an improvised camp in a clearing near a river. Before sleeping, one of the guys, Kamau, started telling stories about the Bailoko. They're ancient spirits, he said, stirring the embers of the fire with a stick. Ancestors who died with resentment in the jungle, small, with big eyes and sharp teeth. If you see them, don't look them directly in the eye. Bullshit, murmured another. Kamau ignored him and continued. If they steal something from you, it means they've cursed you. Local hunters carry amulets for protection. Without them, the Baloko can make you disappear. I laughed. Not out of mockery, but because after everything we had seen in combat, the idea of goblins with fangs didn't seem like the worst threat. But when we put out the fire and prepared to sleep, something inside me didn't feel entirely at peace. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange sensation. There was not a single sound, no insects, no birds, nothing. Only the distant murmur of the river. I stayed still, listening. That's when I heard a laugh. High-pitched, almost childlike, but with something twisted in its tone. I turned slowly and saw Kamau sitting up, completely awake. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The others sat up too, tense. No one spoke, but we were all on high alert. Then, between the trees, we saw movement. Small silhouettes, shorter than a child but disturbingly agile. They slid between the trunks with inhuman speed. We pointed our flashlights. Nothing, just thick vegetation. "Must be monkeys," someone whispered. But we knew they weren't monkeys. They didn't move like animals. They didn't sound like animals. We decided to stay on guard, but we didn't shoot. It didn't make sense to waste bullets on shadows. By morning, we realized something was wrong. Our supplies were gone. Not all of them, just a portion. Someone had rummaged through our backpacks but hadn't left clear footprints, only small marks in the dirt, as if something tiny and light had been walking among us. Kamau turned pale. "They marked us," he murmured. I wanted to tell him to calm down, that it was just jungle thieves, maybe children from a nearby settlement. But then I noticed something else. My machete, which I always kept next to me, was now stuck in a tree several meters from where I had slept. No one in the group had moved it. The laughter from the night before echoed in my memory, and for the first time, I felt real fear. We decided to continue the mission. We couldn't let something so absurd delay us. We walked for hours, but the atmosphere felt different. The jungle, which was always alive with sounds, felt dead. Only our footsteps and the crunch of dry leaves remained. One of us, a Bossie, suddenly stopped. "What the hell?" He pointed at the ground. There were small mounds of dirt arranged in a strange pattern, like someone had placed them intentionally. At the center of each was a tiny bone, maybe from a bird or rodent. Kamau tensed. "They're offerings for the Bailoko." We looked at each other. No one wanted to say it, but we all thought the same thing. We had entered a territory that did not belong to us. Night fell quickly, as it always does in the jungle. We took turns standing guard, but exhaustion was slowly overtaking us. During the third shift, we lost him. Abasi had been awake, or so we thought. But when it was time to switch shifts, he didn't respond. We searched for him with flashlights. His backpack was there, his rifle was there, but he was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, only the jungle, vast and endless. The laughter returned. Closer. Mocking. "They're hunting us," Kamau whispered. We didn't wait until morning. We decided to move immediately. We walked in tight formation, weapons ready. Then we saw them. Not one, not two, dozens. Small figures with gleaming eyes, long sharp teeth, leathery skin like that of an old man, but with thin, agile bodies. They moved between the trees, appearing and disappearing in the foliage. One of us fired. The shot echoed through the jungle, but there was no cry of pain, only laughter. Then something started hitting us from the trees, stones, branches, but also bones. Human bones. We ran, I don't know for how long, but I felt their presence, their mockery in every shadow. By the time the sun began filtering through the trees, only 3 of us remained: Kamau, myself, and one other. We didn't talk, we just kept walking until we finally reached a village. The villagers looked at us with understanding, but not surprise. The elders stared at us and said only one thing: "The Biloko let you go, but now you are marked." Kamau left the army soon after. He said he would never return to the jungle. I'm still here. But every night when the wind rustles through the trees, I hear laughter, and I know they are still watching. Mokelembembe. The monster of Lake Telesweat drenched my uniform, clinging to my skin like a second layer. We had been in the jungle for days, following tracks that seemed to lead nowhere. The humidity gnawed at our bones, and the feeling that something was watching us never left, day or night. There were 6 of us, soldiers sent on a reconnaissance mission in the Congo Basin, but the truth was, they had sent us to chase a ghost. I had heard the stories before. Every soldier in Zaire knew them. Something enormous lived in the waters of the Likuala River, something that the tribes feared to name out loud. They called it Mokelembembe, the one who stops the flow of the river. Some said it was a guardian spirit, others an ancient beast. The one thing that was certain was that no one who claimed to have seen it was ever the same again. The first time I heard its name was from an old French explorer I met in a bar in Kinshasa. He was drinking alone, staring deep into his glass. He told me he had seen its footprints with his own eyes, had heard its roar echo through the jungle, and at night something massive had moved between the trees, something too big to be an elephant. He leaned over the table and whispered, "Don't look for it, soldier. If you find it, you won't live to tell about it." At the time, I laughed. I thought he was just another drunken old man telling stories to scare the gullible. But now, as we hacked through the thick undergrowth with our machetes, his warning weighed on my mind like a stone. We had been deployed near Lake Tele with clear orders: look for any signs of hostile activity. Officially, the government feared that rebel groups were hiding in the jungle. Unofficially, we knew they were after something else. At the base, rumors spread about a creature that some soldiers swore they had seen in the river. We weren't cryptozoologists or explorers. We were military men. But when you're sent on a mission, you don't ask questions. The first few days were hell. The jungle was not a place for men. Everything in it seemed designed to kill us. Mosquitoes the size of a thumbnail, snakes that could end you with a single bite, treacherous swamps where you could sink and never be found. But the worst part was the nights. The first incident happened on the third night. We had set up camp near the river, far enough to avoid crocodiles but close enough to collect water. We had lit a small fire and took turns on guard duty. I was standing watch when I heard it. A low, deep sound, something between a growl and a distant roar. I felt it more than I heard it, like a vibration in the ground, a tremor in the air. I immediately went on alert and aimed my rifle into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" I asked in a low voice. One of my comrades, a quiet, battle-hardened man, nodded. Something big. We didn't say anything else. We woke the others in silence and put out the fire. We waited in the dimness, but nothing else happened that night. At dawn, we decided to investigate. That's when we found them. The footprints. They were massive, bigger than any human foot, wider than those of an elephant. They sank deep into the mud, as if something colossal had passed through recently. One of the soldiers, a veteran with years in the jungle, swallowed hard and murmured, "This isn't normal." We all knew it. There was no recorded animal in the region that could have left those marks. We followed the trail in silence. With each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was a primitive instinct, something you couldn't ignore. We had become prey. By midday, we reached a clearing by the river. The water was murky, as if something heavy had disturbed it recently. Then we saw it. On the other side of the river, among the trees, a shadow moved. It wasn't an elephant. It wasn't a hippopotamus. It was something else. A titanic form with a long neck that rose above the vegetation. We couldn't see it clearly, but whatever it was enormous. One of the soldiers instinctively raised his rifle. "Don't shoot," I ordered in a whisper. But it was too late. The shot rang out like thunder through the jungle. The river exploded in a burst of foam and mud as something colossal emerged from it. For an instant, I saw the full silhouette. A massive body, thick, dark skin, a neck rising like a sauropod's. A tail that whipped through the water with the force of a storm. We had no time to react. The monster roared, a sound that shook our bones, a cry that didn't belong to this era. We ran. The jungle became a labyrinth of shadows and fear. We could hear the crashing of trees, the splashing of something pursuing us through water and vegetation. We didn't know if it was chasing us or simply warning us to leave. One of our men screamed. I turned just in time to see him vanish into the undergrowth, dragged away by something we couldn't see. His scream faded into a wet, choking gurgle. We could do nothing. We could only run. Running without direction, stumbling, falling, getting back up. The sun began to set, and the jungle grew even more hostile. We stopped when we reached a rocky outcrop. We were at the edge of a ravine. There was no escape. The jungle fell silent. Only our ragged breathing and the distant murmur of the river remained. We waited. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The creature never appeared. When we were sure it was gone, we started our journey back. It took us 3 days to escape the jungle. There were 4 of us when we reached the base. We never spoke of what we had seen. The commanding officer simply looked at us sternly and told us to forget everything. There was no mission, no creature. Years later, I still have nightmares. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, I swear I can still hear that roar in the distance. The Beast of Katanga. I will only say that I was a soldier in the Belgian Air Force during the time when the Congo was still a colony. I was in many missions, but there is one that still haunts me. Years have passed, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the sound of rustling leaves in my head and the image of those yellow eyes burned into my mind. I am going to tell you what I saw in the jungles of Katanga, though most will not believe me. It was a scorching day at the Kamina base. The sun bore down on the runway, and the heat made the air ripple like a mirage. I was assigned to a reconnaissance flight in a helicopter, something routine. With me were 2 Congolese soldiers and a Belgian mechanic. Our mission was to patrol an area where, according to reports, there was rebel activity. We took off without problems. Below us, the jungle stretched like an endless green ocean. From above, everything seemed peaceful, but I knew that down there, things hid that did not want to be seen. After more than an hour in the air, something caught my attention. To the left, among the trees, I saw a clearing where the vegetation was strangely flattened. "Do you see that?" I asked over the radio. One of the Congolese soldiers, a man hardened by the jungle, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We shouldn't go down there, sir. That place is not good." "Why?" I asked. He didn't respond immediately. He looked at the Belgian mechanic, then at his fellow soldier. "It's a cursed place," he finally said. "The elders speak of a beast that lives there, a snake larger than a truck. They say it swallows men whole." I laughed. "Come on, those are just stories." But I noticed his expression didn't change. "You've never heard of the Katanga serpent," he insisted. I had heard rumors before, whispers from soldiers and hunters, but until that moment I had never taken them seriously. "They're just stories," I said. The soldier didn't reply. Then the radio crackled. "What the hell is that?" the mechanic muttered. I looked down. In the clearing, among the crushed vegetation, something moved. Something big. Too big. I slowed the helicopter to get a better look. And then I saw it. A snake. But not a normal snake. It was enormous. Impossible. Its brown-green body slithered between the trees, and with each movement, the undergrowth crackled like a truck rolling over it. Its head rose from the foliage, towering several meters into the air. It had yellow, cold eyes, and when its mouth opened, I saw fangs longer than my forearm. "God!" the mechanic shouted. The beast lifted its head even higher as if it were looking at us directly, and then it attacked. It launched itself upward with terrifying speed. I reacted instinctively, yanking the controls. The helicopter lurched violently as we struggled to escape, but the damn thing wouldn't stop. It jumped higher, mouth open, and its fangs passed centimeters from the fuselage. I felt the tail of the snake slam into the bottom of the helicopter, and for a moment, I thought it was going to bring us down. "Go up! Go up!" the Congolese soldier shouted. I pulled the controls with all my strength and we climbed rapidly. From above, I could see it in all its terrifying size. Its body stretched over dozens of meters, thick as a baobab tree trunk. And worst of all, it didn't look scared, just angry. We fled from the clearing at full speed. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to focus. No one in the cabin spoke. "Was that real?" the mechanic finally whispered. I didn't answer. The jungle had fallen into absolute silence. No birds, no monkeys, nothing. As if nature itself was holding its breath, the Congolese soldier finally spoke. "I told you, the beast is real." I took one last look down. Between the trees, I saw the gigantic serpent slithering back into the jungle, its scales glistening under the sunlight. And in that moment, I knew that there were things in this world that should not exist. We didn't land until we were far away from that area. When we returned to base and tried to report what had happened, no one believed us. Some laughed. Others said the heat had made us hallucinate. But I know what I saw, and every time I close my eyes I see it again, lurking in the jungle, waiting. Yakuruna, Lord of the Waters. My grandmother used to say that the river was not just water and fish, that in its depths lived ancient beings, foreign to our world. As a child, I didn't understand her words, but after serving in the Amazon, patrolling its rivers and tributaries, I knew she was right. Years ago, when I was a Marine infantryman, I was stationed at a riverine base on the border between Peru, Colombia, and Brazil. Our mission was to control illegal trafficking and maintain sovereignty in a land where the jungle devoured everything, even time. The days were long, the nights even worse. Among us, there was a saying, "If the enemy doesn't find you, the jungle will." And believe me, the jungle always finds a way. That night, like so many others, we were patrolling the river. There were 5 of us in the boat, moving through the thick fog that floated over the water like a shroud. The engine hummed low and steady, and the only sound that accompanied us was the buzzing of insects and the splashing of fish against the surface. At first glance, everything seemed calm, until we heard it. A female voice, soft, faint, drifting over the current as if the river itself carried it. "Did you hear that?" one of my comrades whispered, the youngest in the group. No one answered immediately. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't normal to hear voices in the middle of the river, in absolute darkness. "It could be someone calling for help," another said, squinting toward the nearest shore. But there was no one, only trees leaning over the water, their roots sinking into the current like claws. The helmsman slowed the boat, and we turned off the engine. The boat drifted gently. We waited in silence, listening. The voice returned. This time, clearer, closer. "Help me." It was a plea, a woman in distress, but something in her tone made my skin crawl. It didn't sound human, it sounded like the river itself was whispering in our ears. The youngest soldier grabbed his flashlight and pointed it at the shore. "Hey, tell us where you are," he shouted. No response, just the reflection of the water shifting under the light, long, twisted shadows gliding between the roots. Then he saw her. "There she is." His voice was full of certainty, of a strange emotion I didn't understand at the moment. He pointed his flashlight at a spot in the water. We all followed his light with our eyes, but we saw nothing. "She's right there, calling us." Before I could stop him, the young man jumped into the river. The impact was strong. The water closed over him, and in an instant he was gone. "Shit!" another soldier yelled as we turned on our flashlights, scanning all directions. There was no sign of him. The river was calm, too calm. Only a few bubbles rose to the surface, as if something was pulling him down. I jumped in without thinking. The water was cold, thick, and the current pulled at me as if it had hands. I opened my eyes underwater, but all I saw was darkness. Then I saw it, not the soldier. Something else. A humanoid face with bluish skin and eyes that glowed like embers stared at me from the depths. It had no hair but fins on the sides of its head. Its mouth moved, but it made no sound. And behind it, in the shadows of the water, I saw figures. More of them. Barely discernible shapes watching from the abyss. A primal terror consumed me. I felt something grab my leg, and I knew that if I didn't get out at that instant, I never would. I kicked with all my strength and broke the surface, gasping for air. My comrades had already pulled the young soldier onto the boat. He was convulsing, as if something unseen still held onto him. We dragged him onto the boat and started the engine at full speed. The young man was pale, trembling, his eyes lost in the distance. "He was talking to me," he whispered. "He was calling my name." That night, the locals explained what had happened. It was the Yakuruna, an elder told us. He calls to those who feel lost inside, those who belong more to the river than to the land. If you hadn't pulled him out, he would have become one of them. No one slept that night. And since then, whenever we patrol the river, we avoid listening too closely to the sounds of the water, because the river always has something to say, and sometimes it's better not to answer. Whistle of the Tunche. The jungle is a humid hell. They say that in war, the cruelest enemy isn't man, it's the jungle itself. It gets into your skin, into your bones, into your mind. But what truly terrifies isn't the heat, the fever, or the beasts. It's what hides between the trees. I was a soldier in the Peruvian army, and if there's one thing I learned during my years of service in the Amazon, it's that there are things in that jungle that shouldn't exist. This story happened many years ago, but I still carry it like a wound that never heals. We were stationed at a small military outpost deep in the Amazon rainforest, near the border with Brazil. Our mission was simple: patrol, secure routes, and maintain a presence in the area, nothing we hadn't done before. There were 9 of us hardened men, used to the humidity that seeped into our bones and the mosquitoes that devoured us alive. That night, we were assigned night patrol duty. Nobody wanted to go out after an old veteran had told us about the Tanche. According to him, if you heard it whistle, you were marked for death. It was just a story, we thought, something to scare the new recruits. But in the jungle, legends are born from something real. We walked in a single-file formation, moving carefully. The moon barely filtered through the thick canopy. The jungle was a constant murmur: insects, snapping branches, the trickling of a nearby stream. Then we heard it a whistle long. Cold. We froze. No one spoke, but we had all heard it. It wasn't the shriek of a jaguar or the call of a bird. It was a human whistle, unnatural in its tone. And it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "What the hell was that?" one of the soldiers whispered. I didn't answer. I just raised my hand, signaling them to keep moving. But the air grew heavier. The jungle, which never falls silent, seemed to hold its breath. And then the whistle came again. Closer this time. One of the recruits gripped his rifle tightly, his knuckles turning white. We were trained to fight guerrillas, poachers, even drug traffickers, but this was something else. "It's the Tunche," the veteran muttered, his voice low and tense. "Don't answer the whistle. Don't run. Just keep walking." For some reason, no one questioned the order. We continued forward, but the fear clung to us like sweat. The path became endless. Every step was a battle against the overwhelming urge to flee. Then one of our men, the youngest, the most inexperienced, made a fatal mistake. "Who's there?" he called out. His voice shattered the silence, and the jungle answered, a low whisper, something between laughter and weeping. A shadow moved between the trees. It didn't walk, it floated. The recruit panicked and fired. The gunfire illuminated the forest for a second, and we saw it. A long, skeletal face with hollow eyes, a mouth open in a silent scream. The bullets ripped through the night, hitting nothing. The thing didn't move. It only watched us. And then, the whistle returned, this time right beside us. The veteran screamed at us to run. And this time, we didn't hesitate. We ran through the jungle, tripping over roots and thorns, gasping for air. The whistle always at our backs. We didn't all make it back. When we reached the camp, there were only 7 of us. The recruit and another soldier were missing. We tried to organize a search, but the veteran stopped us. "You won't find them," he said. "The Tunche took them." Nobody argued. The next morning, a patrol found their bodies. They had no visible wounds, but their eyes were open, staring at the sky, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. Nobody spoke of what happened that night. The commander wrote a death by unknown causes in the report, but we knew the truth. Since then, every time the jungle falls silent, every time the wind carries a strange melody, I remember the whistle of the tunch, and I pray that it never calls my name again. Ghostly cries in the night. I am a soldier in the army, and for years I have patrolled the Amazon carrying out missions ranging from counter-narcotics operations to escorting scientists on environmental studies. But there is one night that marked me forever. We were in Guaviare, Colombia, a team of 8 men. The mission was supposed to be routine: patrol the area and report any suspicious activity. It wasn't our first time deep in the jungle, but this time, something felt different. From the very beginning, the jungle was unnaturally silent. The insects, the howler monkeys, even the birds, everything seemed to have disappeared. Only the sound of our boots crushing the damp soil and the whisper of the wind through the trees remained. "This place feels wrong," murmured Corporal Rodriguez. "Stay alert," I replied, adjusting my rifle. We moved forward in formation, each of us in position, scanning our surroundings. Then we heard a cry. It wasn't the growl of a jaguar or the screech of a monkey. It sounded like a baby, small, fragile, sobbing in the middle of nowhere. We froze. "Did you hear that?" Murillo asked, his face pale. I nodded. My heart was pounding in my chest. It was impossible. We were days away from the nearest village. How could there be a child out here? "It could be an animal," Sergeant Ospina suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then a woman's voice broke the silence. "Please help my baby." The sound came from deep within the jungle just ahead. We looked at each other, uncertain. "We can't ignore this," Ospina said, taking the lead. We followed the cries, going deeper into the darkness. Every time we thought we were close, the voice moved farther away, luring us deeper and deeper into the jungle. After what felt like hours, we reached a clearing. The moonlight illuminated the ground covered in dry leaves, and at the center, there was nothing. "This doesn't feel right," Murillo whispered, flicking the safety off his rifle. A cold wind blew through the clearing, and suddenly the crying stopped. The entire jungle fell into absolute silence. Then, Ospina shouted, "Get down!" We dropped to the ground expecting an ambush, but there were no gunshots, only a laugh, soft, heartbreaking. And it came from everywhere at once. A chill ran down my spine. "They're toying with us," Rodriguez whispered. "It's not human," Ospina muttered, his face tense. Something moved between the trees. It didn't walk, it floated. A woman's silhouette, tall and slender, her long hair covering her face. Her dress was torn, and though the moonlight shone brightly, her body cast no shadow. "What the hell is that?" Murillo whispered, his voice trembling. The woman lifted her head. We couldn't see her face, only 2 black voids where her eyes should be. "She's staring at us," Rodriguez murmured. Then she moved toward us. "Fire!" Ospina commanded. We unloaded our rifles, bullets cutting through the air. The rounds passed right through her. She never stopped moving. Then the cold hit us. Not the cold of night or fear, something worse. A deathly, suffocating chill. Rodriguez dropped to his knees, shaking. "We have to go now," Murillo yelled, dropping his rifle and running. I wanted to stop him, but it was too late. His silhouette disappeared into the jungle. The woman let out a scream, not human, but something else entirely. And then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the sun was rising. We were in the same clearing, but something was wrong. The trees were different. The ground looked drier, as if time had passed differently. Ospina and Rodriguez were with me. Murillo was gone. "Where's Murillo?" I asked, my throat dry. Rodriguez didn't answer. He just pointed at the ground. There were drag marks leading into the jungle. We never found his body. When we returned to the base, no one believed us. They said we had gotten lost, that the jungle had played tricks on us. But I know what I saw since that day. Every time I patrol the jungle, I carry a small amulet blessed by the indigenous people. I don't know if it actually works, but it gives me some peace. And every night, deep in the Amazon, when everything seems calm, sometimes, just sometimes, I still hear the crying ghosts of the massacre, Ituri, Congo, 2003. I went through brutal training, through the fear of death, through the weight of responsibility. And then they sent me to the heart of Africa, to a land where life and death were two sides of the same coin, Ituri, Democratic Republic of the Congo, year 2003. We were deployed as part of the UN peacekeeping mission tasked with containing ethnic violence in the region. Our base was in an improvised camp near the town of Che, a place that on maps seemed insignificant, but in reality was a living, hell-burned villages, unburied corpses, the empty stares of the few survivors. There were no heroes, no villains in that conflict, only death. The nights in the jungle carried a heavy air as if nature itself was grieving. From the moment we arrived, the rumors began. The Bangladeshi soldiers talked about distant screams in the darkness, wails that came from deep within the jungle. At first, we thought it was just hallucinations from exhaustion or simple superstition, but then we heard them ourselves. The first time I heard it, I was on guard duty with another soldier, a Ugandan veteran whose face had been hardened by years of war. The wind whispered softly through the trees, and the humid night wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. Then we heard it. A moan, long, heartbreaking, like the wail of a woman who had lost everything. "You heard that?" I asked, feeling a cold shiver crawl up my spine. My comrade just nodded, his jaw clenched. We raised our flashlights and scanned the jungle. Nothing, only trees and shadows. But the crying continued weaving through the trunks carried by the wind. The next morning, we talked to the other soldiers. Many had heard the same thing. Some even swore they had seen figures moving in the jungle. The commander ordered nighttime patrols to investigate. But things only got worse. One early morning during a patrol, we found footprints, small footprints, like those of barefoot children. We followed them deeper into the jungle, our flashlights piercing the darkness. The air smelled of mud and rot. Then, one of the soldiers froze. "There," he whispered. We all turned our eyes toward where he was pointing. Between the trees, barely touched by the moonlight, they stood. Women, their clothes torn, their faces hidden in shadow. They stood motionless, holding the hands of small, frail children. The kids looked emaciated, almost skeletal. They weren't moving, but we could feel their gaze on us. A heavy, impossible gaze. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The soldier who had spoken took a step forward. "Who are you?" he shouted. Silence. Then the figures began to move. They didn't walk. They floated between the trees. The children slowly turned their heads toward us. We couldn't see their faces, but we could feel their eyes. A soldier fired. The gunfire roared through the jungle. When the flashlights shined on the clearing again, they were gone. Only the footprints remained. The following days were a nightmare. No one spoke about what had happened, but fear was in every glance, in every nervous gesture. A chaplain was called to the camp. He blessed the area and lit candles at the jungle's edge. For a time, the sound stopped, but the feeling of being watched never left. Before I was sent to a new mission, a village elder spoke to us. "Here," he said, "death does not bury itself. It stays with us." I never forgot his words. I never forgot the faces we never fully saw, because even today, during my sleepless nights, I still see them, watching, waiting.